Pituitary gland. Your pituitary gland is a small pea-sized endocrine gland which is located at the base of your brain, just below the hypothalamus. So, first of all, we have to know where is pituitary gland located. So here you can see pituitary gland is located at the base of your brain, as we said. So we can zoom from here. This is the base of brain. You can see pituitary gland is located at the base of brain, and it is located just below hypothalamus. You can see this is hypothalamus, and just below hypothalamus you have pituitary gland. Now remember, pituitary gland is divided into two lobes. One is the anterior lobe of pituitary gland and another is the posterior lobe of pituitary gland. Now why it need to be divided into two lobes, that is anterior lobe and posterior lobe? Because the anterior lobe produces different hormone and posterior lobe has different hormones. Remember, posterior lobe does not produce hormone, it simply stores the hormone produced by hypothalamus, but anterior lobe does produces primary hormones, which is in fact also controlled by hypothalamus. Hypothalamus controls both secretions from both posterior lobe and anterior lobe, but anterior lobe synthesizes its own hormones. And then we can see the further details of which hormones are produced by anterior and posterior lobe in the next slide. As we said previously also in the previous video where we discussed in detail about hypothalamus physiology and its hormones, here we can have again a quick review. Hypothalamus produces this releasing and inhibitory hormone which acts on to control the secretions from the anterior pituitary, and then hypothalamus produces two hormones, that is ADH and oxytocin, from the neurosecretory cells, and these go via nerve fibers to be stored into the posterior pituitary gland, whereas the other hormones of the hypothalamus apart from ADH and oxytocin like gonadotropin releasing hormone, corticotropin releasing hormone, all these releasing and inhibitory hormones go by means of blood vessels, by means of blood into the anterior pituitary. So this is the difference. Hormones of hypothalamus can travel via blood or nerve fibers into the anterior pituitary and posterior pituitary respectively. So the hormones coming into anterior pituitary by means of blood, which include these releasing hormones and two inhibitory hormones, that is dopamine and somatostatin of the hypothalamus, which have control of the release of hormones from the anterior pituitary. So the hormones of posterior pituitary, as we said, include ADH and oxytocin. These are not produced by posterior pituitary. These are simply stored in the posterior pituitary. They actually comes from the hypothalamus, so this is important. Whereas anterior pituitary does synthesizes its primary hormones, which include follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, which is in turn controlled by gonadotropin releasing hormone from hypothalamus. When gonadotropin releasing hormone signals the anterior pituitary, only then it releases follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, and the ultimate target site of which is gonads, that is testes and ovaries. Similarly, corticotropin releasing hormone has a control on the anterior pituitary, which hormone, and adrenocorticotropin hormone. This is the second anterior pituitary hormone. Then another hormone is thyroid stimulating hormone, and the ultimate site of adrenocorticotropic hormone is adrenal cortex, which will secrete then cortisol. Then similarly we have thyroid stimulating hormone, another anterior pituitary hormone, another one is prolactin, another is growth hormone. All these are controlled by hypothalamic respective hormones, like thyroid stimulating hormone controlled by thyrotropin releasing hormone, prolactin controlled by prolactin releasing, and there is also inhibitory hormone of prolactin, that is dopamine, which comes from hypothalamus. Similarly, for growth hormone we have growth hormone releasing hormone and somatostatin, which is inhibitory in nature. So this is just a quick overview of, we discussed in detail about this in previous video of hypothalamus physiology. So here our more important concern is about anterior pituitary hormones. So here we have thyroid stimulating hormone, which will act on the thyroid as the name indicates. So thyroid, and then that will produce ultimately T3 and T4 thyroid hormones. Prolactin will have a role on mammary glands regarding milk production. Then growth hormone will act on the liver and produce insulin like growth factors, and this will help also in the growth of the bones, muscles. So overall growth of the body, as the name indicates, growth hormone should be responsible for growth of the body. Then we have posterior pituitary, which stores the hormones which are actually produced by hypothalamus, then comes via nerve fiber to be stored onto the posterior pituitary, which include anti-diuretic hormone and oxytocin. antidiuretic hormone, anti-diuresis. So as the name indicates, it prevents the diuresis, that is, it causes water retention from the kidneys. Then oxytocin has an effect on the mammary glands, and it also has a role in the labor. I will again summarize them in another much better presentation. Here we have hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is connected by means of stalk to the anterior pituitary and posterior pituitary. So nerve fibers basically connect the hypothalamus to the posterior pituitary, which releases two hormones to be stored onto the posterior pituitary, which include oxytocin and vasopressin, also known as antidiuretic hormone. So these will be stored in the posterior pituitary, and in anterior pituitary, the rest of the hormone from hypothalamus will travel via blood into the anterior pituitary, which include growth hormone, prolactin, luteinizing hormone, adrenocorticotrophin hormone, thyroid-stimulating hormone, and all of their functions, which I said earlier for regarding growth hormone, include growth of the bones, muscles, organs of the body. Then prolactin has a role in milk production from the breast. Here we are having just a visual view, a quick review. Regarding luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone, both will have roles on the gonads, affecting ovaries. Follicle-stimulating hormone will stimulate follicles productions in the egg production in the female cycle, and luteinizing hormone has a role in egg release, which is also known as luteinization process of the ovaries also, and the egg release from the ovaries, which has a role in reproduction. Then follicle-stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone also will affect testes in case of males, and this will also cause release of hormones like from ovaries estrogen, progesterone, which has a role in development of reproductive system and reproduction. Similarly, from testis, testosterone can be released when these hormones, follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, acts on these organs. Then third hormone, that is adrenocorticotrophin hormone, for example, another hormone from anterior pituitary, which will act on the adrenal cortex, and this will cause release of cortical hormones from the adrenal cortex. Then thyroid stimulating hormone will act on the thyroid gland to produce thyroid hormones. And remember, all of these products can also negatively inhibit the anterior pituitary, which is the feedback loop mechanism, because there has to be one sufficient amount of thyroid is released, it will cause negative feedback, that is causing negative signal on the anterior pituitary to stop further release, so that the quantity of these hormones, the final product, is in the adequate quantity, not too much or too less, which will result in disorders. I explained in detail about the feedback mechanism in hypothalamus physiology lecture, but again, just to give a review of it. Then we have vasopressin, which comes from the posterior pituitary, also known as antidiuretic hormone. It will act on the kidneys to cause water retention, antidiuretic. So, and regarding oxytocin, it has a role on two main organs, that is on the breast it will cause milk ejection in response to nipple stimulation when the baby causes sucking reflex. Then apart from that, oxytocin also has a role in labor. It has a role in labor when the baby's head engages, and it causes the uterine contractions to start. So that's just a summary of all the hormones and their respective functions, which comes from anterior and posterior pituitary glands. Then finally, we can summarize whatever we studied. So we said that the pituitary gland is a small pea-sized gland which is located just below hypothalamus. Here we have hypothalamus, just below hypothalamus we have pituitary gland, and it is divided into two parts, that is anterior pituitary and posterior pituitary gland. Posterior pituitary stores two hormones, that is antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin, which comes from hypothalamus by means of nerve fibers. And then we have anterior pituitary, which has these large number of hormones, and these comes by means of blood from hypothalamus. Not remember, these are primarily produced in the anterior pituitary, but yes, their control is by means of hypothalamus, ultimately by those releasing and inhibitory hormone, as we discussed. And then we have these hormones which are produced in the anterior pituitary, adrenocorticotrophin hormone, which has a role in affecting adrenal cortex and producing cortisol. Then we have growth hormone, which will affect muscles, bones, body growth. Then melanocyte stimulating hormone And remember, this additional hormone, melanocyte-stimulating hormone, this is basically produced alongside adrenocorticotrophin hormone. Basically, they both have a same precursor, pro-opiomelanocortin, that they have a same precursor which is known as POMC, pro-opiomelanocortin, which basically produces adrenocorticotrophin hormone and melanocyte-stimulating hormone at the same time. And then adrenocorticotrophin hormone will act on the adrenal cortex, whereas melanocyte-stimulating hormone, this will affect the skin, causing melanin production in the skin, which results in pigmentation of the skin or skin color. And then we have thyroid stimulating hormone, which will act on the thyroid gland to produce thyroid. We have this has a role in metabolism of the body. And as we said later on, follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, which are under control of also hypothalamus releasing hormone. Then this will act on the testes and ovaries in respective males and females respectively, which has a role in reproduction and also production of hormone like testosterone and estrogen, progesterone in case of females. And oxytocin, as we discussed, has a role in labor and also had a role in milk ejection in females. And anti-diuretic hormone has a role in retention of water balance in the body. So overall, the functions of pituitary gland could be memorized by just considering all these hormones. Like it has a role in fighting stress by means of cortisol production from adrenal cortex. Like we can say it has a role in growth by means of growth hormone. It has a role in the skin pigmentation. It has a role in metabolism of the body. For example, thyroid major role is metabolism, and it has a role in reproduction by means of these follicle stimulating luteinizing hormone. It has a role in milk ejection and labor, also oxytocin. And we can say that pituitary gland also has a role in water balance by means of anti-diuretic hormone. So overall, we discussed the pituitary gland, where it is located, parts of pituitary gland, anterior and posterior pituitary. We also discussed the hormones produced by both of them, that is posterior pituitary and anterior pituitary. We also discussed the functions of each hormone briefly. So I have just summarized a very detailed topic, but just in a convenient way so that you can understand it. If you have any question, you can ask in the comments.